Hello and welcome to this live recording of Media Confidential at Prospect. We are here to discuss The Hack, a new 7-part drama which started on ITV last night and which deals with the biggest newspaper scandal in British history. But I'd like to start with you, Alan. Can you take us back to the moment when Nick Davis, played by David Tennant in this new drama, first approached you with this story of phone hacking?
This story changed the way I thought about Britain and the way that power worked.
I thought we, in a sort of cozy kind of way, that we lived in a world of checks and balances. That was how democracy was made up. This pillar might fail here, and we're seeing this happening in the US at the moment. But this pillar here would be rock solid. And within about 3 days of the story, John Yates, the inspector at the Met, announced an investigation in the morning and came out later the same day and said, "We've investigated. There's nothing here." Shortest investigation in history. And so you thought, okay, so we can't rely on the police. And then almost blanket silence from the rest of the press. So the police had gone, the rest of the press had gone, with one or two honourable exceptions. Nobody in Parliament wanted to have a go at it. And when you saw what happened to the MPs who did have a go at it and how they had their private lives absolutely trashed, that was a completely rational choice by MPs. And then the press regulator came out with a report saying it was the Guardian to blame, not the News of the World, which was, a travesty which led to the press regulator being closed down because people realized it wasn't a regulator. So you looked around at this sort of landscape of silence and you thought, no, there are no checks and balances here. We're absolutely on our own with a company that hit back very aggressively with lies. We know through the paperwork that subsequently emerged that they set up an entire team on Nick Davis to try and get the dirt of him, and that was just the routine within that company. It was a sort of mix of blackmail, criminality, political pressure, commercial pressure, and probably commercial espionage, all within one company. And it was a deeply unsettling and disturbing picture that Nick had, unearthed.
It didn't really have an impact until the sort of last question for this bit. It didn't have that impact until 2 years later with Millie Downer. Was that the moment that you thought this has changed everything?
Well, almost. I mean, at one point, and this comes out in the drama, and essentially what the two strands of the drama so skillfully do. But there was a moment where Andy Coulson, the editor of the News of the World, who had resigned, and he was going to go into Downing Street with David Cameron. And it became apparent that he had used somebody who was waiting to go on trial for the axe murder of Daniel Morgan. So this was a new level of journalism rolling around in the dirt with some really vile people from the criminal underworld. And we couldn't report that because of the strange contempt laws that we have in this country. And at that point, I rang the New York Times, Bill Keller at the New York Times, the editor there, and I said, look, we've done all we can with this story, but you're not afflicted by the same laws that we are. Would you like to come and do some reporting? And he sent 3 reporters that week, and I think they were all Pulitzer Prize winning thoroughbreds. And it was like the sort of cavalry coming over the hill, because you thought, at last, somebody else is going to do some reporting here. And they went into it really thoroughly. It took about 3 months. And they published a very long, in the way of American journalism, 10, 15,000 word piece that not only corroborated everything that Nick had written, but added some new reporting of their own. And that was kind of unignorable. All the people who said, "Oh, it's just the Guardian," they've got this thing about tabloid journalism, or they're left wing, they hate Rupert, all the excuses for not reporting this out then went, and the police then felt they had to act, and then came Millie Dowler, and at that point the story became unstoppable.
And everybody else had to write it too.
Yeah.
Toby, can I ask you? David Tennant has had interviews. He's busy filming Rivals, I hear, but he has talked about he was one of the 1,600 people that we know were hacked. Did it happen to you, or do you know people having worked in the industry?
If it did happen to me, I think my life is so entirely boring. they hacked away for years on end and found absolutely nothing. Protracted conversations with my children. No, I'm not aware of it. I was struck by David's phlegmatic response, saying, "Oh yeah, I was hacked," and I think that's just he'd come to terms with it. And I think that there was an atmosphere at that time. I think he was shocked by it, but I think he was also philosophical about it because it was happening to so many people.
Yeah.
But no, I don't have any experience of that.
What made you so attracted to sort of getting involved in this? I mean, obviously the Mr. Bates connection, but why this particular script?
Well, the Mr. Bates thing would be the sort of thing that would put me off doing it, because it would mean in some way repeating something, which I don't think this is what it's trying to do. It's not trying to hit the jackpots again. I mean, I worked with Patrick. This is the third time I've worked with Patrick. I worked on a film with him over 10 years ago called Marvellous, about the Stoke City kit man. And so I'd stayed in touch with Patrick because I could tell he had a very good eye for projects. And you tend to want to stay near those people. Then I heard about the hack, and obviously I knew the history involved. What struck me most was the boldness, Jack's formal boldness in this extraordinary, apparently writing two completely separate TV series that then begin to entwine. And it's you want to be associated with things which are trying to move the form forward. You know, there's so much pressure in our industry on sameness, on repeat formulae and stuff like that. And this clearly isn't that. It's not going to be Mr. Bates. It's not trying to be Mr. Bates. It's, it owes as much a debt to All the President's Men and that kind of paranoid thriller, that's that genre. So that all attracted me. And then you get to work with people who are, exciting people to work with. And then you might occasionally get to play a hero of yours. And so that becomes a sort of cherry on the cake of the whole project. But no, I can say from start to finish that the standards, the production standards and the integrity with which the project was done was in almost deliberately inverse proportion to what we were depicting in terms of what was going on with the hackers.
Right. Jack and Patrick, I want to ask you why you wanted to put this on our screens. I mean, the book, Nick's book, was published in 2014, recently updated. When were you first interested in it, and why did you come to this story, which was legally challenging? Who wants to go first? I want to ask you both. But
well, I suppose it starts with me. I tried to option the Nick's book in 2014 and lost out to George Clooney. And thought
much excitement in the Guardian newsroom when that happened.
And we thought we were doing quite well until one day they just called up the agents and said, sorry, it's not happening. And then we found out why. So I was always interested in the story. I was, and I thought I knew all of it. And then when we came to think about doing it again, we did a lot of research, met a lot of people, and we discovered that we didn't know the half of it. and the Daniel Morgan and investigation and those connections, which, by the way, were featured in Nick's book and indeed other podcasts that we'd listened to and were inspired by. We weren't the first people to pick up on that, but as we spotted the connections between the two stories, we got quite angry. I was also blown away by Nick's courage in speaking out against his own industry, and I don't know that I'd be able to do that, and he did, and I just find it remarkable. So, any abuse of power makes me angry, and I hope that it'll make others angry. So that's what gets me up in the morning, I suppose.
I think you said it. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, you said it.
He mentioned Daniel Morgan. I mean, I'm trying to ask questions that we're trying not to give as many spoilers, as it was sort of released properly last night. And obviously there's 7 parts. And unless, and I'm sure some of you would have stayed up all night to watch all 7 episodes, there will be some that, although the story is known, will still be sort of blown away by the end. And this bringing together of 2, because episodes 1 and 2 in particular, you've got these sort of different heroes. There's just one connection where the Daniel Morgan, the police detective, is given this case and is a contact of Nick's. Has known Nick for a long time, so that's the only connection between those sort of 2 episodes, really. What made you? What was it about linking those 2 stories? Because it's incredible, the structure of it. These huge amounts of information. 2 huge stories that are linked. What made you do it the way you did?
Well, it was Patrick's idea to tell both stories. And so that was there from the start. The thing that I wanted to do was tell them as if they were separate, and then bring them together, because I'm always interested, as Toby said, I think there's a lot of us that are interested in trying to work out how to play with the form of television. I think the problem of watching, that's Patrick's phone, so I'm not going to pick it up, but the problem of watching TV with your phone and kind of concentrating and knowing, I need to concentrate at about minute 15, then minute 30, and then the last 5 minutes, I know I really need to watch very carefully. But the rest of the time I can sort of just drift and do other things. And I think trying to challenge the rhythm of that, trying to challenge the rhythm with which people watch, I think is really important right now. And my original conception was that episode 2 started with Dave, the character Dave Cook, on the phone to Nick. So you did immediately realize you're in the same shows. And what Lewis Arnold, who's the person we haven't talked about yet, who's the director, our wonderful director, said was that if you're going to be courageous, be courageous. Show some courage here and make it as if they are watching 2 completely separate stories. Make it as if when people sit down and press play, they go, this doesn't seem right. This is a totally different way of telling this story. These are totally different characters. What the hell is going on? And he said that's the proper thing to do in this instance. You've gone halfway, now go all the way. And that's what we did. And it's it definitely is challenging, and I'm really proud that we've made that challenge.
Yeah, no, structural bravery. Also brave in terms of the story. I mean, legally, I've got to ask, obviously, it was shown last night, reaction from News International today?
Yeah, already.
How soon? When did it come this morning?
The night before last.
And sort of specific details, can you share?
No. They have asked questions of some of the things that we've said in the drama, and we've gone back to them and said, it's okay, it's fair.
And how, because I know at the end of the first episode, there is there is the sort of their right of reply. Take us slightly through the process, because I'm more aware of what happened on The Guardian, which was obviously fraught, but to get that onto the screen, how much right of reply did you give the people who were portrayed in it?
Everyone got the same right of reply, which is every single person we feature in the drama in any meaningful way is told beat by beat in great detail. And this is the same for every drama, same for Mr. Bates, for any other one we've done. They are told beat by beat what we are saying about them and how we are saying it.
They don't get to watch it though, do they?
Well, no, this is before we start filming.
Okay.
We give them the right to reply before, at script stage. We don't necessarily show them the scripts, but we effectively do, because they get detailed documents in which it will tell them what we are having them say and what they are being told in return, etc. And then we listen to their responses, but we are bearing those responses, or we are comparing those responses to the accounts of up to about 60 people, I think, on the hack that we have spoken to, who all feature in a meaningful way, either outside the story looking in or are in the story. And we've been able to find the line that we trust completely between the differing accounts of various people. That's how it's done. That's how a newspaper article presumably is written. It's the same process. It's a journalistic process that if you appear on broadcast network television, not a streamer, there is then a compliance team who will read our scripts and question every line in it. So there are a number of exquisitely written scenes by Jack and indeed by Gwen on Mr. Bates that the compliance team said, you've only got one witness to that. It's one against one, and it doesn't matter if that witness is Gordon Brown. You can't, if the other person disputes it, you can't have it. So you have to be able to bring to the table a number of different accounts that bear witness to what happened in a room, if in any way there is any chance of being contentious.
How much were you helped though by 7 police investigations, 40 convictions? Did that help in terms of legal?
There is a huge amount on in the public record that helped us in the writing of the story and helped us in our responses to News UK. Yeah.
Coming back to sort of, people in the newspaper, how much did you get to say in sort of, actually, I don't think I was like that. I didn't do that thing with my glasses, which I'm going to have to talk to you about. More seriously.
Yeah, well, it wasn't.
How much did you sort of say, hang on, that's not how it was?
I don't think I did I?
We did the same process with Alan that we did with everyone else. He was offered. Alan is so graceful and so humble, and therefore said very little. But we did lean on him heavily for information and guidance on the bigger story, as indeed we did with Nick and Amelia and various other people.
How? And I know that this sort of debate about journalism, first draft of history, truth, drama. How confident are you that it's sort of exactly what happened? I don't just mean legally. I mean, it's a sort of accurate portrayal.
I would say it's as accurate as anyone could make a dramatized version of a true story.
Okay. And how do you feel it sort of represents that crazy period? 11 years ago, isn't it? More.
Yeah, some of it I had forgotten. Occasionally Patrick and Jack would say, "You've got to remember this is a drama."
Yeah,
and anyone who's been in a newspaper office knows that by and large they're very boring places. There are a lot of people looking at screens, and so turning that into a drama is I think a very skillful thing. And so there may have been occasional disagreements inserted that where it just sort of pumped up a bit. But I mean, I couldn't see anything that mattered. I thought it was a very truthful account of what happened.
I did want to know whether the phone call that you listened to see that your phone could be hacked was from your mum, which can't have been true. Or was it?
Not wholly true, no.
Did you? I mean, I know there's sort of been talk about there's so much in this story, and it's such an incredibly important story. What the decision to focus on Nick Davis, Dave Cook, the inspector, almost more so in a way than the sort of the Guardian newsroom, almost more so than the Murdoch employers, who, and indeed the people that were actually hacking phones. Was that a sort of, why did you decide to focus like that?
Because actually the reaction is more interesting than the crime itself.
Hmm.
The thing that interested me and interested Patrick was the response. That actually, because what we're talking about is not journalists behaving badly. What we're talking about is public institutions being complacent with their own responsibilities because they were in a subconscious relationship with Rupert Murdoch. There wasn't like no one was going, oh, let me get Rupert on the phone for guidance as to how to do this. No one did that at all. Of course not. There was no explicit complicity. What there was it is in our best interests to behave in a certain way, and that certain way is in compliance with his interests. And that was fascinating to me, and that made it a bigger story than a story about the media. That made it a story about all our institutions. That made it a story about government, and that made it particularly a story about the Metropolitan Police and that relationship, which had become so polluted for lots of very interesting reasons, but which meant that they were not holding an organisation to account, and it was horrifying that they weren't doing that. One of the most horrifying things in Nick's book, and one of the things that we don't really focus on hugely, but is mentioned, is the fact that their relationship changed as a result of the Stephen Lawrence murder. And you think that of all the responses to Stephen Lawrence, the fact that they said, okay, we now need a media strategy to deal with the tabloids, and that is going to lead us to make decisions that are not necessarily about the Metropolitan Police, but about the public's perception of the Metropolitan Police. I think it's really profoundly troubling, and that's why the Dave Cook case sits alongside Nick Davis, and that's why we start the story not with the bad behaviour, but with actually the investigation of that behaviour.
Right.
And as part of that, also, the third main element is the press itself, and the way that the press was silent to what the Guardian was doing.
You've touched on it, both of you, all of you, in fact, about your sort of desire to bring important social stories to the screen. But actually, journalism is not typically, I mean, you've mentioned All the President's Men, but there aren't that many, particularly now, stories where the journalists are doing good things. They tend to be, if not the baddies, then definitely the morally corrupt. Is it something that you feel is because there were so few journalists, the media was behaving so badly? Or do you see this as really raising awareness that the world needs more journalism, or good journalism, rather?
God, I think there's a ton of good journalism out there, and this is a celebration of one example. I do think we need to celebrate great, courageous journalism as much as we can. In no way is this an attack on the journalism world. It's a love letter. But it is also a story of one journalist pointing out that others are behaving badly. I think this is a fight. This is a story about a fight for truth at a time when the idea of truth has been completely poisoned, not by journalists, but by the wider world. And I think we need to hold journalism up as a sacred profession.
It's interesting, the response of Mr. Bates, if you remember, and I say this as someone that wasn't involved in Mr. Bates at all, though I wish I was, oh, why didn't journalists see this? Why didn't journalists do more? Why is TV drama doing what journalism should do? And actually, the case was they were. Yeah. They just couldn't get. They did. They just couldn't get purchased. They just couldn't get the rest of the media world to take notice of the journalism that they were doing. And that is what this whole drama is about. It's about a group of people who have a story and then have to find a way of legally selling this story in a way that encourages other people to look at it. That we sort of know the truth at the beginning of this whole show. And then it's about how do we navigate the complicated world of our of our legal responsibility, but also everyone else, to bring people into our party to sell this. And that's what they were trying to do. These brilliant journalists were trying to do on Mr. Bates, on the post office scandal, and they just couldn't make it happen. And then finally Patrick and Toby came along and kicked some doors in.
It is. I was going to leave this to sort of closer to the end, but in terms of what you want the legacy of this to be, I know legacy is a tricky word. Alan, I'm going to ask you first. This started in 2009. There were 40 convictions. Most senior members of Rupert Murdoch's empire, and Rebecca Brooks appears very early on. And obviously she went to court and was acquitted of all charges, earned quite a lot of money in compensation, and then went back to the same job a year later and is still there. There was a Leveson 2, which asked for a regulator, an independent regulator. The media said no, it never happened. What do you want, all of you actually, what do you want to happen as a result of this? We know what happened with Mr. Bates was people realised that there had been this terrible thing happening, and it dramatised the scandal. This was also a long time ago, but today we see the same things happening. What do you want to happen? You can go first, Alan.
Well, there was a moment of release, I think, after Millie Dowler, and I got phone calls from people I never thought I would get phone calls from within the press saying, actually, fair dues, well done, and we now see that you were right. And there was a moment which I think was missed, where the industry as a whole could have used this as a way of getting together and cleaning it all up and having a proper regulatory system. And people often forget that Nick's reporting was led by the newsroom of the News of the World. They felt revolted by what they had to do, and they were helping him to try and break this awful culture within the company. And do you remember there was a time when Rupert Murdoch used to have a party in London every year, and everybody went to it? And for about 2 or 3 years, nobody went to it. It was a matter of shame. And in fact, I think he dropped it because he knew nobody was going to come. And whatever it is, 12 years later, it feels to me as though the waters have closed over. And I'm sure the criminality is not going on in the way that it was. But the so-called regulator that was set up, ipso, to replace the PCC, was supposed to be different in one respect, that it had the letter S, which was to do with standards. In 12 years, it's never had a standards investigation. At the back of the room is Dominic Ponsford, the editor of the Press Gazette, who's just done a fantastic story about non-existent influencers who then get picked up by PR agencies, and the stories about them then get fed into the press as though they were real people. And it's just a dishonest scam, but it's systematic. And it's exactly, I was just talking to Dominic, it's exactly the sort of thing that a standards body ought to look into. When Peter Oborne walked out of the Daily Telegraph and said this is essentially a corrupt newspaper, he was the political commentator, the chief political commentator. Nobody from Ipso went to say, well, hold on a minute, that's a big claim by the chief political commentator. Do you mind telling us? I did a chapter in my book, Breaking News, about it. All the Telegraph journalists were desperate to talk about it. Because, well, you know, Jane, because you wrote the definitive book about the Barclay brothers. And that the standards investigator did nothing. More recently with the Jewish Chronicle and the fact that nobody knows who the owner of the Jewish Chronicle is. And there was a series of failures of standards leading to a completely hoax story being placed in the Jewish Chronicle. Nothing from the, so you know, you ask what could be done. I think that the hopes that the post Millie Dowler moment would be a moment that could be embraced to improve the standards of the British press. I think it just didn't happen. And as you say, the press then got together to intimidate the politicians, to scrap Leveson 2, which would have looked at all the criminality that was. So, I mean, Leveson talked about this. He said he looked at the relationship between power, political power, and journalistic power. But I don't think even he anticipated that the sort of bullying power of journalism would so quickly reassert itself.
Mm. Toby, apart from great drama, which this is, what do you think or feel it could and should achieve?
Well, it's a big subject that I've thought a lot about since the extraordinary interest in Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, and one I've been asked to speak about a lot, somewhat inconclusively, about the effect of drama on political change. And of course, I just know from my degree that the roots of drama are in politics, Greek politics of showing political change. I think it's easy to make great claims that drama can change things, like in the emotion of a show coming out, and everyone goes, "Isn't it wonderful? We watched it, we were so engaged," and it's true. But a bit like what you're saying about press complaints, Alan Bates if Alan Bates was sitting here, he'd go, "Well, these people are dying, and their claims and their damages are still not being done." Now, the public want it to be true that this drama sorted it out, but I don't know that drama alone can do it. What it can do is give people a different currency with which to discuss problems, and they can engage with it in a different way. I'm very sad that we are seeing a decline in documentaries. I'm very sad that we don't see, because people apparently don't watch documentaries, we're not getting new documentaries. And I'd like to see, I think we make documentaries brilliantly in this country, and they're not being made. But we make drama brilliantly in this country, but I don't only think political change comes from fact-based drama. I think political change happens because people, lots of different factors together. And Jack's show, Adolescence, it's a fictional story. And we need more fictional stories as well. And I'm sure Patrick would agree with that as well. But there is such a fear now about original programming and original, as we've said already, about formal invention. And that's all I'm really interested in drama. Is formal invention, is shifting the relationship between the performer and the audience. It's kind of what got me excited about drama as a child. Is what is this relationship all about, and how can I play with it? So I think that relating it to political change, it's a very complicated question, and people want it to be simple. And I'm glad that there's a lot of noise generated by these shows. But it needs action after it. These things we want them to, but they don't quite deliver in the way that we assume that they have done.
Yeah. Before asking you two, I do just want to know how long you spent studying Alan before.
Months.
No, seriously, how long?
No, I think Alan very graciously allowed me to sit in his office for a while, and then I went to an editorial meeting. These things are often, I get asked a lot, again, for the reason I've just described. Real stories are somehow measurable by program makers, and they can put because of the cost of making dramas. People want something that they know can be certain, so you get more and more real stories. And so I've played a lot of people who are real, but when you're playing them, I just have to be undistracted. I have to be enough like Alan that it doesn't distract you from the drama. But so few people, with all due respect, Alan, in the general public, are going to be like, kvetching about the fact he's a bit shorter, isn't he? it doesn't bother people. So far more interesting to me, because when it comes down to acting on a film set, often the shot will be about, can I tell the story with the speed with which, can I tell a different story with the speed with which I'm raising the glass with what I'm saying? Can I use my body differently from my voice? Can I counterpart? How does Alan do it? And in a way, how Alan does it, no one will ever know. But to me, that kind of body language and the way, and then little kind of intuitive things like, again,
You're doing
Alan,
him now.
with all due respect, with very intelligent people, often there's a self-effacing quality, and there's no attempt to tell you how intelligent they are. They just have so you're looking at all of this, and then how does it manifest itself in behaviour? Because that's what I dig. I mean, I wish I had a more noble purpose in life, but I like the way people. I like the way the people's body language. I like the way people express themselves, and often on a set you'll go, shit, I don't. If I was really worrying about, I didn't check whether he opens the door with his left hand or his right hand. But opening a door, or the way I open a door, could help me a lot with telling you something about what I really feel, as opposed to what I appear to feel. It's a rather complicated answer to your question. I sat in some editorial meetings, and I didn't really listen to a thing. I just watched. I just watched Alan, and it was as much to do with the fact that he accepted my request to come and watch him. Told me a lot about him, as much as what I saw.
I, for one, I found it amazing. I didn't even realise that he did this thing of putting his fingers in his ear glasses, and I thought,
well, there's something consoling.
So Alan, it was so.
There is something quite consoling about the fact that you're never going to be that person, but you've got something to concentrate on in the fear and panic of having to be someone. You've got something to concentrate on, which is material like videotape or YouTube videos of Alan, sparse bits of thing and you look at it and it distracts you from the actual panic of the fact you've got to play.
Jack, from acting genius to writing genius. How long did it take you? I mean, you do so much, you're so productive. How long did it actually take you? Are you looking
at 4 or 5 years as we've been working on it? How long have we been working on it?
Yeah,
it's been a while.
2020, yeah.
So
I don't think you were. I mean, there's a lot of research and a lot of thinking, but a year of writing, a year and a half.
It felt longer than that.
Yeah, it might have. Yeah, you know what? I don't know.
It was we went through a lot of drafts, and each draft was very painful. Like that thing that Patrick was talking about in terms of compliance, that thing of being sent back to rewrite a scene, not because the scene doesn't work, but because the scene doesn't express what it needs to express, or because someone has complained about this, or something is wrong with that, or it was very, very hard and enjoyable in parts. But yeah, no, I couldn't tell you how long it took, because Toby and I were having this conversation earlier. My life is a blur. They're just like, I go to my shed, I sit in my shed, I hope, and then I leave my shed. That's how every day works, and I couldn't tell you how it gets divided up into different bits.
The question I'd asked about sort of what you hope. You've already talked to people about the scandal that how angry you are about what happened. In the name of journalism, but it obviously wasn't. And there's that wonderful scene at the end where Nick's evidence in Parliament is very emotional, sort of end note to what was done in the name of journalism. But what do you hope comes from this?
I hope that cleverer people than me have cleverer discussions than I am capable of. That my job as a dramatist is to pose a question, and I feel able to do that. In terms of answers, I don't have the sophistication. I did a show last year called Toxic Town that was about the toxic waste scandal in Corby, and the really interesting thing that has resulted over the last few weeks, it's just started to come to light that Des Collins, who was the brilliant solicitor that we showed in the show has been working on in the community and working with some of the mothers, and they have discovered that the council still haven't declared where the toxic sources of waste are, and there are mothers that believe that it poisoned their kids and their kids got cancer as a result, and they're calling them angel babies, and there's other babies that died either in the womb or at birth where they don't have the answer to that too. And so now clever people are starting to put together another case which looks at that. And that's the response you want. That's the response you want. Something that you don't understand, something that goes beyond your understanding, because that's not part of your job. And then they go away and they say, this is what Ipso needs to be. This is how the Metropolitan Police need to operate. A lot was made on Adolescence that we got to go and sit and talk to the Prime Minister. I can tell you we did very little talking. Our job there was to be the Trojan horse that allowed groups like Movember, like Tender, like the NSPCC, to talk to the Prime Minister and explain to him what the problem was with society as they saw it, so that he had those questions in his head as he was trying to formulate policy. And hopefully we created relationships which then continue on. That's what we want with this. We want questions to be asked by people that are very good at asking questions. We've done all that we can, and then we just send it on to the clever people.
Would you like the Prime Minister to call you in to reopen Leveson 2?
No. I would like him to call Alan in and have Alan talk to him about what should happen, and other people like Alan, Amelia Hill. I'd like Charlotte Harris to go in. I'd like the people that we celebrate in this show who know their stuff to go in and talk to the Prime Minister and explain to him why Leveson 2 is still a necessity and why them abandoning it is a big problem. Yeah. And the Labour Party have abandoned it.
Yeah, just before the election.
Exactly.
Patrick, last but not least on this one, you obviously the reaction and the sort of what happened next after Mr. Bates was huge. What do you want? I mean, you could also say the sort of Paula Vennells and a sort of failing public institution is a very different beast to Rupert Murdoch and the world's huge media beasts who still have lots of power. What do you want to happen most? What do you think will happen?
I think these three have said it better and in great detail. Leveson 2 would be my brief answer, but also my understanding is that Nick got into journalism in part inspired by Carl Bernstein and Woodward, and I've heard him talk about All the President's Men as a kind of inspiring thing. So in my dreams, a show like The Hack might inspire the next generation of writers to want to be investigative journalists and to show that sort of courage. I would love that if something helped drive people into this noble profession. The next drama we're making is about Harry Evans and Bruce Page in the 1970s, another golden era of investigative journalism. So I'd love to do what I can. I'm just a producer. I'd love to do what I can to enable stories to be told that might make people want to be great journalists.
Can you tell us much about that? Like, will Toby be playing Harry Evans, for example?
He won't be playing Harry Evans, but I will be begging him to be in it in some way, yeah.
And are any of you, I mean, Jack, I know Toxic Town, but Adolescence, is it having the sort of legal issues you talked about today, but obviously during the writing, during the sort of actually performing real people, real life situations, has it put you off doing this sort of, a fictionalized sort of version of a very true story, or is it just much easier to write fiction?
Patrick will tell you it's just harder to get away now.
Yeah, there's a whole separate conversation and a separate seminar to be had about the funding of mini-series, limited series. I'm doing 2 more true stories, and then unless there is an enhanced tax break, I will not be developing anymore. I will not do any more limited series, not because I don't want to. It's what makes my heart beat, but I can't get the money together. So I very sadly will have to limit myself from now on to returning series.
Which means in 4 or 5 years' time, when you've been working on this for 5 years, they're not going to be these kind of amazing.
Or else a new generation of producers will come along and figure out a different way to do it. I might just be too set in my ways, but I can't figure out a way to do it. I'm really depressed to be saying it out loud. Yeah.
Okay. Trying to think how to end on a more positive note now. The value of good journalism, I suppose.
Or the possibility of an enhanced tax break. That would change everything. Actually, it's not, if I could just bang that drum briefly, it's not asking for more money, and all it does is provide more growth, but it will allow an enormously important part of our culture, the limited series, of which Jack Thorne is arguably its finest proponent, to keep going in the large numbers it needs to enhance our cultural life and speak truth to power. Because on the whole, returning series don't tend to speak truth to power. There is a sort of disastrous censorship that takes place if the miniseries gets closed down.
On that seems like a bit of a perfect place, perhaps, to end this part of the discussion. But first of all, I'd like to thank this incredible panel of people. Alan, doing everything you've done. Toby Jones for sharing with some of the amazing tips. Obviously, Jack Thorne and Patrick Spence. Thank you very much.
This interview was from the latest episode of Media Confidential, a podcast brought to you by Prospect Magazine. To listen to the full episode, click on the link below. And if you want full access to Prospect Magazine, go to prospectmagazine.co.uk.